By the Lord of Thrice, in Christ once hidden, and Saturn's gavel art all now bidden. Soon lightened hearts by harvest rise, but shadows bind when hearts despise. The time has come for souls asleep to strike with blows the foes they keep. And Capricorn will bear their weight, the judgment bound whose love brings hate. His scythe a blight for the weeds that bind the wheat whose twine seeks freedom's kind. Through severed time, new lessons found, wilt thou be hell or heaven bound. Things are about to change in a major way. There's a split coming. You'll notice a division between people. You'll notice a division between people who don't understand how to process what's happening and those who reattune to a more natural rhythm. There's a split taking place, and you'll notice it takes place mostly between people who are heavily dependent on this system and those who've been taking the time to extract themselves from it. A split. For those who are dependent on this system, they'll begin to break down inwardly, a reflection of the system that they're dependent on. The system whose atomic rhythm governs their daily actions. They won't know what to do. They won't know how to process this energy. They've become artificial in a sense, where the archetypes they adopt, they act out on a daily basis, are archetypes that are based on the Matrix's creations, Hollywood's creations, illusions, false paradigms, based on sitcom characters and what Hollywood folk are doing. The artificial human being. Who bases their lives on the general social memes. The memes we see on Facebook. It's basically a reflection of what consciousness is doing in the Matrix. And consciousness is always governed. It's always regulated. It's always told what to think, told what's important. And it's done through culture. The culture is controlled, and it's usually done by the music. They control culture to teach people what to think, to teach people how to process their heat and their pressure. Anyway, you have an artificial human being whose regular thought process is based on the social interactions they engage in on a day-to-day basis with other, inauthentic human beings who take on the role of, when we go to work, we're very different from who we are when we're home. We have we have a mentality we put on to engage in the public from day to day. And then we have a mentality, we are when we're at home around people who are, they know us. So there is an authentic person, the person when you use the restroom, when you're alone and you're staring in the mirror. That person, the person who's staring back at you, the person who can't lie to you, the person you can't lie to, the authentic person who we bury every day when we become the inauthentic person to engage in our day-to-day activities in the world where political correctness governs our thought process. So there's that inauthentic person that we spend the majority of our time being and cultivating every day. And it's based on social memes. It's based on cartoon characters and Hollywood characters and inauthentic constructs of the mind and with inauthentic values. We spend a great deal of our time in that inauthentic person, the person we when we walk into the job, the person who greets people we usually don't want to involve ourselves with, but must on a day-to-day basis because we have to remain professional. Some of us have spent so much time being that person, we don't know how to not be that person. And so now, with the system shutting down and people being forced to stay home and to engage one another, they're going to recognize their inauthenticity. And they'll be forced to engage their shadow. This is a very interesting time because we're watching the divine create Armageddon through the kettle effect by forcing people to come up with their own answers. To think their own thoughts. These people are going to be forced, everyone, not just these people, but everyone, is going to be forced to reconcile with their shadow in some way. On their own terms. The inauthentic person, the shadow, the person we spend a great deal of time not paying attention to. The part of us that's engaged with the constant affair of the ego, the affairs of the ego, engaged in the excretion process of the psychic content that builds up in the subconscious when we bury what we don't wish to pay attention to. Anywhere where we can be distracted, if that makes any sense. We spend all of our time distracted. But what's coming is a time where we're no longer distracted. We can no longer find distraction. The distraction will become a boredom. And mixed with the unrest of the growing hunger pains we begin to feel as our resources deplete, with no answers coming from the government, you'll soon begin to watch things break down, where people are seeking answers, and they're looking for the government to tell them what to think. But no answers will be forthcoming. That's the majority of people. They're going to be forced to fend for themselves, to come up with their own answers, to deal with their own mess, to deal with whatever situation they've created for themselves. And when people are unaccustomed to dealing with that flood of emotional torrent, they project their anger outward toward anything that will trigger them, instead of projecting it inward, instead of checking themselves, instead of being aware of what it is they're feeling, and focusing their attention on what can be done to rectify the situation, to deal with their own mess, to change whatever needs to be changed, to give ego death to the old person and be reborn. They'll be looking for other people to be responsible for their ailment, for their justice. Have you ever noticed that these days, people are so quick to blame, so quick to point fingers, that when there's a problem, they're more focused on identifying the problem than actually coming up with a solution? People are more problem oriented. Even in the world of business, we have, we have entire departments devoted to identifying problems. And if there are no problems being identified, it's as if there's a breakdown in the system. There's a constant need to identify the problem. And we've become problem oriented as a society. And so people have been conditioned to engage the problem and not so much be focused on whether there is a solution, but to simply attack the problem. And that's going to foment a great deal of chaos. So we're watching a split take place between those who are self-governed and will utilize this time to tune into, natural things, to tune into their body, tune into their emotions, to tune into their water and their earth element, to tune into Gaia, to tune into that natural frequency, the divine feminine. And another group of people who have become rage-oriented and are angry to a default, and bitter and enraged and suffering and roaming, looking for sustenance, spiritual sustenance, goodness, anything that is in opposition to the values that they are at that moment oriented with. And their values will be rage oriented. Their values will be looking for those who are responsible. So they won't care about goodly things or things that bring peace. They won't care about innocence. They'll abandon their desire for peace, because in the season of Aries, people become charged to engage opposition by magnetic conflict and electric discharge. We are hyperpolarized at this time and primed for a breakdown in the mind on a collective level. And everything is in place to justify an absolute crackdown on that sort of behavior by the power of Saturn, who now sits at 29 degrees in Capricorn at the height of his throne. And where he's sitting at the moment, He is above Jupiter, Mars, and Pluto, which means he has gained access to the domains of the vortex, of critical mass, and of voltage. And he's about to bring judgment. Saturn. At 29 degrees, he is at the height of his power in Capricorn. And we are playing out that rhythm here on the ground. The government is about to crack down with the full power of Saturn. This is the route we've chosen.